used to think the sound of packing tape was comforting. It meant new beginnings, fresh apartments, new spreadsheets, new adventures. But that day, it sounded like betrayal. Clara stood by the boxes, crisp blouse, perfect hair, voice dipped in artificial sweetness. "Mom, you'll love it there. They have activities, yoga, pottery, a beautiful garden." She couldn't look me in the eye. She just kept smoothing the tape, sealing away my life. My son, Jared, was pacing, phone in hand, scrolling through emails as if I wasn't even in the room. "Mom, this is for the best. You've been alone too long. It's safer." And Clara found the best place in the city. The best place, that phrase stuck in my throat like a bad pill. I'd done the math weeks before. Golden Dusk Care Facility had 3 pending lawsuits, a revolving door of staff, and reviews that all ended the same way. We thought it would be better. But my children were never ones for details, not when they were inconvenient. I wasn't old enough to be invisible. But I was old enough to be ignored. "Mom, you'll have your own room," Clara continued, smiling tightly. "And don't worry about expenses. I'll handle all your finances, just like Dad would have wanted." The way she said it, like Dad would have wanted, twisted something in me. My late husband, Richard, had trusted me with every number, every account. I balanced our books while raising 2 children, working part-time, and clipping coupons for their school trips. Now my daughter wanted to handle what I'd built. Convenience. That's all I'd become, an inconvenience to be managed. The car ride was silent except for Clara's GPS voice giving directions neither of us wanted to hear. Outside the window, the city blurred past, parks where I once pushed strollers, cafes where I'd met friends for birthdays that no one remembers now. Jared was on speakerphone from his apartment, pretending to sound concerned. "Make sure she's comfortable, okay? I'll come visit this weekend." He wouldn't. I already knew. When we pulled up, Golden Dusk looked nothing like the brochure. The paint was cracked, the sign half-lit, the grass yellowing under the autumn sun. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something sour underneath. A nurse with tired eyes greeted us with a smile too wide to be real. "Welcome to Golden Dusk. You must be our new resident, Mrs. Morel." Resident. Not guest. Not tenant. Resident. Like it was permanent. Like the next address would be Heaven's Gate. Clara filled out forms while I sat on a plastic chair, my purse clutched tight. I noticed she never once looked around the place. She just signed papers, nodded, and handed over my checkbook like she was transferring ownership of a car. She stood, brushed invisible dust off her skirt, and kissed my forehead lightly. "You'll see, Mom. This will be good for you." Good for her, maybe. She left with a quick wave. The automatic doors hissed shut behind her. That sound, pshht, was the sound of abandonment. A nurse named Lydia wheeled me down the hall. "Room 214. You've got a roommate, but he keeps to himself. You'll be fine." The hallway lights flickered overhead. Wallpaper peeled near the corners, and the faint sound of someone crying echoed down the corridor. I wanted to cry, too. But pride's a stubborn old thing. It sits in your throat, holding your tears hostage. The room was small, smelling of antiseptic and faint mildew. 2 beds. 2 dressers. 1 window with bars that weren't for decoration. My roommate was sitting near the window, wearing a pressed shirt and an expression like he was permanently unimpressed by everything. He looked up briefly and said, "You're new." I nodded. "Evelyn." He tilted his head slightly. "Arthur." Then silence. Only the clock ticking, loud, like it was mocking us. That night, I unpacked quietly, lining my few belongings in neat rows like I was building a fortress. A photo of my husband on the nightstand. A small gold locket. My favorite sweater, the one with the missing button Jared never noticed. Lydia brought dinner, grayish mashed potatoes, overcooked beans, and something that pretended to be chicken. I forced myself to eat, smiling politely when she asked how it was. "It's fine, dear," I lied. Because complaining didn't change anything here. I could already tell that much. After lights out, I couldn't sleep. The walls were thin, and I could hear the staff laughing near the nurse's station. Their voices were low but sharp. Did you see that old lady who came in today? The accountant one?
Yeah.
She'll be gone in a month. They all say they'll adjust. A snicker. They should just build an express exit for the ones who still think they matter. I turned my face to the wall, jaw tight. The laughter cut deeper than I expected. Not because it was cruelty I could handle, but because it sounded familiar. I'd heard that tone before. When Clara corrected my stories at dinner. When Jared called me old-fashioned. When they both stopped listening mid-sentence. I wasn't here because I was old. I was here because they stopped seeing me. I don't know how long I lay awake before Arthur spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, like someone who'd smoked too many truths and not enough lies. You're not here to die, lady, he said, not even looking at me. You're here to watch what dying looks like. I turned toward him slowly. That's a grim thing to say. He shrugged. It's the truth. They send people here to fade, makes it easier to forget they ever existed. His words sat heavy in the dark. I thought of the house I'd built, the accounts I'd balanced, the birthdays I'd hosted. All that effort, now reduced to a form in Clara's folder labeled a care plan. I whispered, mostly to myself, I won't fade. Arthur gave a dry chuckle. Then you're one of the rare ones. He turned off his lamp. Let's see how long you last. The next morning, the sun came through dusty blinds, thin and pale. Breakfast was lukewarm oatmeal and a cup of instant coffee. The television in the common room blared a news report about rising healthcare fraud, something about millions lost to e-paper patients. I noticed the head nurse sign a delivery sheet but no truck ever arrived. Lydia looked tired again, almost sad when our eyes met. Thought that's when something clicked. I might have been abandoned, but I wasn't useless. I still knew how to read numbers, and people. And something about the numbers here didn't add up. That day, I started paying attention, really paying attention. Every receipt. Every visitor. Every smile that didn't reach the eyes. Because maybe Arthur was right, they brought me here to watch people die. But I'd spent my life finding patterns in chaos. And now I had nothing but time. If this was where they left me to rot, I'd make sure the walls remembered my name, they forgot who I was. But soon, they'll remember what I can do. They say when you lose your home, you lose your purpose. I disagree. You just lose your witnesses. At golden dusk, people moved like ghosts. The residents shuffled between meals, bingo, and bedtime. Days didn't start, they just continued. But I had something no one else did, numbers. Numbers made sense. People didn't, but numbers did. And even in this place, I could see the math didn't add up. IT started small. One morning, I watched a delivery truck back up to the kitchen entrance. Two men unloaded half a dozen boxes, cleaning supplies, according to the clipboard Lydia carried. But when the head nurse signed for it, I noticed something. The sheet listed 12 boxes, not 6. The difference wasn't just a clerical mistake, it was intentional. I'd seen that trick 100 times in corporate ledgers. You inflate the expense, pocket the rest. Later that night, I passed the supply closet. It was almost empty. I wrote it down. Not on official paper, of course. Just small notes on the back of crossword pages and bingo flyers. It was the start of what I began calling the Ledger of Shadows, my own private audit. Arthur noticed, of course. He wasn't a man who missed details. One afternoon, as we sat by the window watching the other residents nap in the sunroom, he said without looking at me. You're writing something. You always are. I smiled faintly. Old habits. What kind of habits? He asked, pretending to read his newspaper. The kind that make people uncomfortable when they think you're harmless. That made him chuckle. You're sharper than you look. So are you, I said, nodding at the fake crossword in front of him. You haven't filled a single square in 3 days. He grinned. Touché. That was the beginning of our alliance, 2 relics refusing to rust. Every week, I found new inconsistencies. Invoices for medications never delivered. Residents billed for therapy sessions that didn't exist. One poor man, Mr. Halvorsen, had been discharged in the system, even though I saw him eating soup across from me at dinner every night. When I asked Lydia quietly about it, she hesitated. That's probably an administrative error, she whispered. Her eyes darted toward the glass office where Mr. Halpern, the facility administrator, stood laughing on the phone. His suit looked expensive. Too expensive for a man who ran a place where the food budget was allegedly tight. I recognized the look in Lydia's eyes, fear wrapped in compliance. The same look I'd seen on junior accountants who found errors too big to ignore but too dangerous to report. Days turned into patterns. I learned which nurses cut corners, which ones still had compassion, and which ones just went through the motions. Halpern was the worst kind, charming when cameras were around, cruel when no one was watching. He'd stroll through the halls, shaking hands, flashing his politician's grin, telling donors, "We're a family here." But families didn't smell like bleach and despair. One afternoon, he stopped me in the corridor. "Mrs. Morel," he said with that smile that never reached his eyes. "Adjusting well, I hope?" I returned the smile. "Oh yes, wonderfully. I even started keeping track of all your improvements." He chuckled. "Oh. A new resident historian?" "Something like that." I tilted my head slightly. "Tell me, how do you manage so well with such limited funding?" "It's impressive." He blinked just once, but it told me everything. He wasn't used to questions with teeth. Experience, he said quickly. "We do more with less." I gave a small nod. "Yes. I've heard that before." When he walked away, I felt the faintest thrill. It had been years since I'd played this kind of game. And now I had nothing left to lose. A week later, Clara called. The first time since she dropped me off. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind of tone she used when she wanted something. "How are they treating you?" I saw the facility tagged on Instagram, looks so cute. I glanced at the peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. Cute. Right. "I'm fine, dear," I said evenly. "Settling in." "Oh, wonderful. Listen, Jared and I thought we'd come by this weekend. Maybe take a few pictures for the family group. You know, show everyone how well you're doing." Family group. They hadn't invited me to that chat in over a year. Still, I smiled into the phone. I'd love that. They arrived Sunday afternoon, both overdressed for the occasion. Clara in her designer coat, Jared in a blazer he couldn't afford. The residents stared. It wasn't often visitors looked like they walked out of a magazine spread. Clara hugged me tightly, too tightly. "Mom, you look great." Jared nodded, flashing a smile at the nurse's desk. "This place is nicer than I thought." "You're lucky, huh?" I watched as they posed beside me for selfies, careful to angle away from the cracked wall behind us. "Smile, Mom. Show everyone how happy you are." Clara chirped. I smiled. I smiled because I knew this photo wasn't for memory, it was for performance. They wanted the illusion of love, not the weight of it. Arthur, from across the hall, muttered under his breath, "Hollywood couldn't fake it better." After an hour, Clara handed me a tote bag with a treats. A sweater, a box of cookies, and, ironically, a brochure for a financial planning seminar. She patted my hand. "Oh, and don't worry about bills. I'm still managing your accounts. You just relax, okay?" I thanked her sweetly. But that night, I checked the small account statement I'd secretly asked Lydia to print for me under the guise of a records mix-up. My pension deposits were being transferred. Not to the care facility, to a secondary account in Clara's name. House maintenance fund, it read. House maintenance. My house. The one she'd moved into last month. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. They'd taken my home, my money, my voice. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that they'd also given me time. And time, for someone like me, was ammunition. I folded the paper neatly, slid it into my Bible, between Psalms and Proverbs, and smiled to myself. Let them think I was fading. Let them think they'd buried me under pills and pity. Because when I resurfaced, it would be with interest. The next day, I began to rebuild my old self quietly. I asked Lydia harmless questions, how invoices were filed, how often deliveries came, how the budgets were reported. She thought I was just curious. But every answer went into my growing secret ledger, a map of corruption hiding in plain sight. Arthur started helping me discreetly. He'd distract the nurses while I copied down shipment details. He'd pretend to nap in the lounge while listening to conversations between Halpern and his staff. He'd been a journalist once, a good one. You know, he said one night, if we find enough, we could blow the whole thing open. I looked at him and smiled. Not yet. Not until I know who's signing the checks. Because I'd learned something from a lifetime in accounting, small crimes always lead to bigger ones. And if I followed the trail long enough, it might lead straight to the people funding this nightmare. Lydia began trusting me more. She'd linger after shifts, sighing. You're the only one who notices, Evelyn. The others, they just stop caring. Maybe they were taught to stop, I said. Maybe it's easier to survive that way. She nodded. I used to believe this job meant something. But now. Her eyes flicked toward Halpern's office. You didn't hear it from me, but we have ghost residents, names that don't belong to anyone real. Billing codes that bring in money for patients who don't exist. Ghost residents. So Arthur had been right. There was something darker here. That night, I stared at the ceiling, the ticking clock louder than ever. If the facility was running ghost accounts, then the corruption wasn't just local. It meant someone higher up was protecting it, maybe even Clara, unknowingly, by signing payment authorizations on my behalf. A laugh escaped me, bitter and small. Maybe the universe had a twisted sense of humor, an accountant trapped in a scam factory. But maybe it also handed me exactly the stage I needed. Arthur turned his head slightly. What's funny? Nothing, I said softly. Just realizing. I might have one last audit left in me. The next morning, I dressed neatly, combed my hair, and wore my pearl earrings, not for vanity, but for armor. In the mirror, I looked like someone's grandmother again. Good. Let them underestimate me. At breakfast, Halpern strolled by, greeting residents like a campaign trail stop. When he reached my table, I smiled. Good morning, Mr. Halpern. I wanted to thank you for keeping this place running so efficiently. He puffed up, grinning. We do our best, Mrs. Morell. Always nice to hear appreciation. Oh, I mean it, I said warmly. I've been tracking how smooth everything runs, all those shipments, invoices, payrolls, it's fascinating. His smile faltered for half a second. Then came back, tight and bright.
Ha!
Always nice to see a resident take an interest. I sipped my coffee. I was an accountant for 30 years. Numbers comfort me. They tell the truth even when people don't. He excused himself quickly after that. Arthur smirked from across the table. You enjoy making men sweat, don't you? I dabbed my lips with a napkin. I enjoy truth. The sweat's just a bonus. That night, I added a final line to my secret ledger before turning out the light. They think I'm fading. They don't realize I'm remembering everything. Let them believe I'm fragile. Because when I rise, it won't be quietly, it'll be with thunder. I used to think decay was slow, a gentle fading, like autumn leaves turning gold. But here at golden dusk, it was alive. It moved. It crept through the walls like something breathing. If you pressed your hand to the wallpaper long enough, you could feel the soft give underneath, the moisture, the mold, the quiet rot. That's what this place was. Not a home. A body rotting from the inside out. And yet, I couldn't stop peeling back its layers. The IT happened on a Tuesday morning. Lydia had just wheeled in a new resident, a frail woman named Mrs. Denton who clutched a photo of her cat like it was a lifeline. Once Lydia left, I noticed she dropped a stack of papers from her clipboard. Invoices. Delivery forms. Payroll sheets. The kind of paperwork people ignore, unless they've spent 30 years balancing ledgers and smelling fraud before the ink dries. I knelt to gather them, eyes scanning over the signatures. Same handwriting, different names. Same purchase order, 2 dates. Same delivery log twice. And one name that didn't belong at all. Patient ID number 982, J. Morel. For a second, my breath caught. Jared. But no, the address was the facilities. The age listed, 81. Someone had created a ghost resident under my family name. My blood ran cold. I was still staring at the papers when Lydia's shadow crossed the doorway. Her voice, usually soft, carried an edge this time. Mrs. Morel, what exactly are you doing? I straightened up, slipping the papers back onto the desk. Oh, just looking for the crossword section, I said lightly. Lydia sighed, closing the door behind her. Her hands trembled slightly. You shouldn't be in here. People disappear for less around here. Disappear? I raised an eyebrow. You mean fired? She hesitated. Sometimes. Sometimes worse. We had a night nurse, Gemma. She filed a complaint about missing medication. The next week she was transferred. Nobody's heard from her since. Her voice lowered. Mr. Halpern runs this place like a company, not a care home. And people like you, curious, observant, you make him nervous. Good, I said quietly. Lydia blinked, surprised. Good. I've spent my whole life making the wrong men nervous. That was the beginning of our strange friendship. She started sitting by me at lunch, sneaking me extra sugar packets like contraband. In return, I asked questions, gentle ones. How long she'd worked there. How payroll was handled. How they reported medication supplies. Each answer painted a darker picture. The nurses were overworked, underpaid, and off the clock for hours that mysteriously vanished from the system. Halpern promised raises every fiscal quarter, but the money always got stuck in approval. I began to see it clearly. Golden Dusk wasn't just neglectful, it was profitable neglect. They made money from cutting care. From our pain. Arthur was the one who brought me the idea. He'd been rummaging through the storage closet again, his favorite pastime when insomnia hit. That night, he came back grinning, holding a small black device between 2 fingers. Found it in a donation box, he said. Old voice recorder. Works fine, if you know how to sweet-talk batteries. I stared at it. You're suggesting espionage? He smirked. Big word for a Tuesday night. But I took it. Because words were one thing, proof was another. That week, Lydia and I coordinated our first little act of rebellion. While she distracted the head nurse with a false supply request, I slipped into Halpern's office and planted the recorder under his desk, taped just beneath the drawer where he kept his whiskey and private files. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would give me away. Every creak of the floor felt like a siren. But when I left that room unseen, something in me shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting. Each night after curfew, I'd sit by the window with my flashlight and my growing secret ledger. The pattern was becoming undeniable: money laundering, double billing, ghost residents, falsified medication reports. All approved and signed off by Halpern himself. Lydia brought me information in whispers. Mrs. Denton's pills? Half of them never arrive. Payroll says I worked 20 hours this week. I worked 40. And my favorite. Guess who just got a new car, paid in cash? Halpern's grin in the parking lot told me all I needed to know. Arthur called our operation Project Duskfall. He said it sounded like a movie title. I told him it sounded like justice with a sense of humor. That night, I dreamt of my house. My real house, sunlit kitchen, oak cabinets, the faint smell of Richard's coffee. Clara and Jared were there, sitting at the table, laughing while flipping through my old files. They were signing something. I couldn't see what, but I heard Clara's voice say, "It's for her own good." Jared laughed, tapping the paper. "Don't worry. She won't even know we used her account." I tried to shout, to stop them, but the pen in Clara's hand became a knife, cutting through my signature. When I woke, I was gripping the blanket so hard my hands ached. The room was quiet, the recorder light blinking faintly in the dark. Arthur was snoring softly. I whispered into the silence. "You took everything from me. I'll take back everything you built on my back. By the end of the week, Lydia slipped me a folded note after breakfast. Inside was a printout, an internal memo marked confidential. It listed new state inspection dates, falsified staff-to-patient ratios, and a directive. Prepare public spaces for audit. High non-compliant residents. Non-compliant. That meant the sickest ones, the ones who made the place look bad. The ones who couldn't speak for themselves. I felt the rage boil quietly beneath my ribs. Rot, indeed. Not just in the wallpaper, in the people running it. Lydia was trembling when she asked, "What do we do now?" I smiled slowly. "We build the case. Carefully. Completely. And when we're ready, we burn their little empire down." Arthur raised his teacup from across the room. "To rot and ruin," he said. We clinked our mugs together, his tea, my watered-down coffee, and for the first time since I arrived, I laughed. A real, dangerous laugh. Because now, I wasn't just Evelyn Morel, the forgotten old woman. I was Evelyn Morel, the quiet accountant. And this time, I wasn't balancing books. I was balancing justice. They thought they buried me under bills and pity. But they forgot, I count everything. Even revenge. They taught us in accounting school that every irregularity is a signpost. A misplaced decimal, a duplicated invoice, a signature that didn't match the usual scrawl, each one points you toward someone trying to hide something. At Golden Dusk, the signposts were everywhere. You just had to know how to read them. It began, I suppose, with the charities. On their face, they were lovely things, small, glossy pamphlets with smiling faces, Friends of Golden Dusk, Sunrise Eldercare Trust, Hearts for Harvest. They arrived in donation boxes donated by well-dressed men who shook Halpern's hand with the kind of familiarity reserved for campaign donors and favored contractors. He'd parade them across the hallway bulletin board, pin their logos next to photos of residents, and pat the backs of cameras when the press came by. "We're grateful for the community," he'd say. The cameras ate it up and fed it back to the viewers at dinner time, a loop of praise and soft focus hands. But in the margins of invoices and bank statements, the real paper trail, those charities were ghosts. I started with the simplest trick, cross-referencing names. A donation listed under Sunrise Eldercare Trust, dated June 12, showed a wire of $50,000. The donor's name was a local developer I'd never heard of. The check cleared through a bank 2 towns over and was credited, not to Golden Dusk's accounts, but to a shell company called Marble and Birch LLC. The address for Marble and Birch was a mailbox at a law office. The law office belonged, by coincidence, to a lawyer Halpern praised during one of his cocktail soirees. Those were small things by themselves. But then I looked closer at payroll. Nurses whose hours were slashed on paper showed up at the register at the corner diner every Sunday, clocking double shifts with cash tips. Medications listed as ordered were rarely delivered. When there were deliveries, they came in half the quantity and half the quality claimed on the PO sheets. Food costs reported as a premium, while the kitchen served congealed casserole. Insurance reimbursements for specialized care were tallied, billed, and immediately rebundled into invoices from Marble and Birch, which then issued them to Sunrise as the consulting fees. Nobody was consulting anything. They were laundering. I made a list. I copied the entries onto safe paper, the kind you can tuck into a Bible or fold and slide into the seam of a mattress. I noticed patterns, the same names cropping up on different ledgers, the same bank routing numbers, recurring transfers the first Monday of every month, always just after the state's reimbursement checks hit the facility's primary account. It smelled like someone had set a scheduled siphon and walked away. Arthur called it poetry, Lydia called it survival. I called it evidence. I wrote my letter with the same care I used to write financial reports. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't include accusations without backing. I stapled copies of bank statements, photocopies of the donated pamphlets, highlighted the routing numbers, circled the transfers, and attached a printout of the recorder's first successful night, Halpern's voice, silky and bored, promising discretion, to a man who described himself as a community partner. The voice was evasive, practiced. They'd been doing this long enough to get the rhythm right. Detective Rowan Hale, I addressed it. The name came from the paper, a city blotter item about a detective assigned to healthcare fraud a few counties over. I didn't know him. No one in this building did. That was an advantage. I signed the letter E, not my initials, a nod to the mysterious elder, maybe, or some bit of romanticism left over from magazine headlines. I sealed the envelope and handed it to Arthur, who promised to slip it into the mailbox on his way into town. He looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and something softer, admiration, perhaps. You're a dead woman walking if they figure this out, he warned. Then let them walk to me, I said. I'm tired of being the one buried. When the letter went out, the tide changed. Halpern's smile tightened. It was subtle, the way a drawstring pulls tight until the fabric bunches. He started to show up at meals with a different suit, a different cologne. He began to watch us instead of merely managing the place. He replaced the night shift supervisor with a man named Derek who had a hard jaw and fewer questions. Derek prowled the halls like a landlord who'd heard the rumor of termites. Lydia began to move with the caution of someone avoiding a fresh bruise. She no longer lingered at the window, she no longer brought extra cookies for the residents. Fear had a way of hollowing people out, and I watched her hollow with a slow, maternal sorrow. One afternoon, my phone, a small thing I kept hidden beneath my pillow, buzzed with a call. Jared's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered, my voice polite, thin as tissue paper. Hi, Mom, he said. There was that practiced warmth in his tone, the kind that sounds expensive. Listen, I need a favor. I'm between partners on this new venture, it's a really good opportunity. I could use a short loan. You know, just help me get over the line. The line buzzed with the impatience of someone who expected a yes. I smiled at the memory of his small hands the day he'd been born, the way they'd wrapped around my finger like a promise. My hands had taught him arithmetic with flashcards. My hands had tightened shoelaces and signed report cards. Now they trembled in a different, sharper way. Ask your sister, I said, smooth as a ledger page turned. I'm a little tied up. He made a noise that was half laugh, half hiss. Tied up? Mom, that's not funny. You know I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it. Ask Clara, I repeated. She manages the estate. She'll know. It was a lie. Clara didn't manage anything except photo angles. But it was a convenient one. He hung up in a snap that sounded like the final clip on a binder. He did not call back. I didn't cry. I logged the call in my head as if it were another line item. Betrayal, I thought, could be sorted the same way one sorted mismatched receipts. The next day, something else shifted. Halpern began to ask pointed questions. Who's been in the records room? He demanded one morning, standing in the corridor with a clipboard like a warrant. Has anyone been handling invoices? I watched Lydia's face from my seat at the dining table. She dropped her fork, a chink of porcelain like a signal. Her eyes flicked to mine for a fraction of a second, a whole language in that glance. When he couldn't find his papers, he grew cruel. In the staff meeting he barked about loose cannons and internal theft. He wore the language of corporate paranoia like armor. Derek stood at his elbow, grin hungry, and Lydia's jaw clenched so tight it looked like she might snap. He began to interrogate residents, too, as if we were complicit in his missing funds. He would stop by the activity room and ask in a syrupy voice, "Mrs. Morel, have you been handling any of our paperwork?" The microphone of his suspicion was always too loud, the accusation slotted perfectly for a camera that might be watching. When he asked, I laughed in my throat and said, "Nothing." He didn't have evidence, not yet. He only had fear, and fear is loud and empty. Lydia paid the cost for our curious little conspiracy. One late afternoon, she arrived for her shift and found herself called into Halpern's office. We watched through the slats of the curtain as the two of them spoke. Her shoulders grew small. She emerged an hour later, hair dulled by whatever words had been used to break her. Halpern's eyes held a cold calculation. Derek's jaw was a wolf's promise. That night, Lydia did not come to our window bench. The next morning she arrived with a bandage hidden under her sleeve and a bruise blooming like autumn on her cheek. She told me she'd been reassigned to the storage room for a few days. The look in her eyes told me that reassigned was a euphemism for warning. The bruise told me who had delivered that warning. You learn quickly in places like this that courage is contagious and consequences are personal. I could have folded, could have closed my ledger and pretended I'd never seen the transfers. The rational part of my brain, the part that balanced risk and reward like a careful cashier, whispered that discretion would keep me alive longer. But the other part of me, the one that had learned to swallow indignation and spit out strategy, had other ideas. If they were going to push, I would push back harder. The recorder, which Arthur had rescued from a box of donated junk, became our secret radio. One night, we sat together on the window bench, the moon stitching silver across the floor. I cued the device and listened to Halpern's voice, slow and warm as if he were discussing a wine list. He spoke into his phone about the next transfer, named a meeting place, and dropped a name for Marble and Birch as casually as if he were talking about the weather. "That's our thread," Arthur whispered. "It's a rope," I corrected, and the imagery of pulling something heavy free from the mud felt correct and satisfying. We began to act with more precision. Lydia, when she dared, left unsigned slips in places she knew I'd find them. Arthur started volunteering to walk to the town post box at odd hours. I learned to keep my own ledger not just in my head but in 3 separate places, my Bible, the hollow behind the picture frame in my bedside table, and the inside pocket of my jacket. I learned to write in a shorthand that would look like the scribbles of an old woman and not the precise notation of a 30-year accountant. But secrecy breeds mistakes even for the best-laid plans. One evening, as I moved to the records room with a small stack of copies, a hand fell on my shoulder. "You're very thorough, Mrs. Morel." Halpern's voice was too close. His shadow blocked the lamplight. I turned slowly and met his eyes. There was a peril in their politeness that cold-blooded men often wear when they mean to frighten you without leaving bruises, a warning that said, "Stop, and I will not be kind." "You shouldn't be in here," he said. "These are staff only." I was looking for the crossword, I said, and it was the first lie I'd told in months. It was a small one, and it was a lie because sometimes lies are tools shaped like kindness. He smiled at a thin, practiced curl. "We have cameras, you know. We watch carefully for those who meddle." "I suppose you do," I said, letting the words dangle like bait. "I suppose you have to, with so many generous donors and so much responsibility." His jaw tightened. "We look out for our residents," he said. "If you have concerns, perhaps you should leave them to management." I folded my arms and felt the paper in my pocket, crisp and certain. "Management has concerns," I murmured. "I have ledgers." He laughed then, a sharp sound that had nothing to do with amusement. "Well, if that's the case, I hope your ledgers do well for you. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." He let me go. That small release, to continue breathing under threat, felt like both victory and invitation. The message was clear: stop, or the stop will be carried out for you. Later that night, as the recorder blinked with its small, patient light, I considered the scales of what we were doing. Lydia had a bruised cheek and a reassignment. Arthur's old bones were working overtime to cover errands, and Jared had the audacity to ask for a loan. My children had folded me into the neat, disposable package people used to explain obligations to the inconvenient elderly Halpern prowled like a man with too many secrets and too little conscience. If our little group were to succeed, we needed allies, people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by truth, the detective, perhaps, and a reporter who had begun to sniff rumors around the city. But allies were public, and public attention ate secrecy. We needed a way to be loud enough to matter and quiet enough to survive until the right moment. I turned the recorder over in my hands and felt the weight of what we had that Halpern did not. Proof. Paper made truth heavier. Voice made it impossible to deny. Numbers, when arranged with care, leave little room for spin. The world liked tidy things. The ledger likes to be balanced. Before I went to sleep, I took a small pen and wrote on a fresh page in my ledger, "Go big." Not reckless, not loud, deliberate. Follow the line back to the river. Cut the source. When I closed my eyes, the picture that came was not of the money or the papers. It was of Lydia, standing without a bruise one day, showing a new nurse the proper way to chart a patient's meds. It was of Arthur's face when a headline finally printed the truth, eyes dry and satisfied. It was of residents who could walk to the garden without an appointment. It was, plain and honest, revenge dressed as repair. If Halpern thought he could intimidate us into silence, he was about to learn that the quietest people often know the loudest songs. I had lived long enough to know how to wait, how to plan, and how to make markets, even dark ones, pay interest on past sins. The ledger would be the last thing he ever underestimated. Emotional beat: if you want to crush a nest of lies, you don't reach for the nearest twig. You start at the roots. The morning it all broke, the air smelled different. Sharper. For months, Golden Dusk had been a closed system, a quiet circle of routine and rot. But that day, even the walls seemed to hum, as if they knew something was about to shift. It started with the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A van, white with a blue stripe, pulled into the parking lot. Big block letters ran across its side. Channel 9 News. Arthur spotted it first through the window. "Well," he muttered, tugging at his cardigan, "either the apocalypse is here, or someone finally noticed." The door swung open, and out stepped a young man in a wrinkled shirt and a tie too bright for the hour, Benji Cole, investigative reporter for the local news. He had that look journalists get before the world decides whether to hate or praise them, hungry, hopeful, and just a little nervous. Behind him, a camera woman adjusted her lens, already capturing footage of the cracked driveway, the peeling paint, the smell of neglect leaking through the open windows. Inside, chaos erupted. Halpern stormed down the hallway like a man chasing smoke. "Who authorized this?" he barked, shoving past Lydia. "We don't allow unscheduled media. Where's security?" Benji met him halfway, mic raised, voice calm but cutting. "Mr. Halpern, I'm Benji Cole with Channel 9 Investigates. We've received documents and recordings suggesting misused state funds and patient neglect at Golden Dusk. Care to comment?" Halpern's face drained of color. "That's outrageous," he snapped. "We're a respected facility, our residents are happy and well cared for." Arthur, from his wheelchair by the lounge, called out loud enough for the mic to catch. "If moldy casseroles and stolen pensions count as a care, then sure, 5 stars. The camera woman zoomed in on him instantly. Laughter rippled among the residents, not joyful laughter, but bitter, vindicated. Lydia's hands shook as she served breakfast under the camera's gaze. For the first time, she didn't hide the bruises on her arm. The lens caught everything, the cracked tiles, the flickering lights, the half-empty medication trays. Benji's team moved fast, interviewing residents, filming everything Halpern wanted hidden. And when Halpern tried to block their way, Benji handed him a printout, one of the very documents Evelyn had sent. A ledger excerpt. A transfer to Marble and Birch LLC. Halpern froze, lips parting soundlessly. "Can you explain this?" Benji asked, voice like a knife wrapped in politeness. Halpern didn't answer. He turned and walked off, too quickly, too stiffly. The camera followed. By evening, the footage was live. The screen in the rec room glowed as residents gathered, whispering. It was surreal, watching Golden Dusk's hallways appear on television, our faces blurred, our voices trembling. The headline read. The Golden Dusk Scandal, State Funds Stolen, Elderly Neglected. Clips rolled, moldy food, broken beds, Lydia's tearful testimony, Arthur's sarcastic one-liner replayed 3 times for effect. And then, the bombshell. An anonymous whistleblower, known only as Amda, had provided extensive financial evidence. That's you, isn't it? Arthur whispered. I didn't answer. But he saw it in my eyes. Benji's narration continued. Sources confirm the whistleblower's documents have led to a criminal investigation. Detectives have identified multiple shell charities linked to Golden Dusk's administrator, Mr. Philip Halpern. The next clip showed flashing lights outside the facility. Detective Rowan Hale, tall, calm, with the weary confidence of a man who'd seen too many excuses, stepped out of his car. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. When he entered the building that afternoon, silence followed him like a tide. He walked straight past the front desk, flashing a badge, and said, Mr. Halpern. I think you and I need to have a very honest conversation. By evening, Halpern was escorted out in handcuffs. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Some residents clapped. Others cried. Lydia stood against the wall, hands covering her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Arthur muttered, about damn time, and saluted the detective with his plastic cup. But victory came with an aftertaste, bitter and cold. When the officers were gone, a woman from the state board arrived. Her voice was kind, but her words were sharp. The facility will be shut down temporarily, she said. We'll relocate residents to nearby centers while we investigate further. Nearby centers. That meant more buses, more strange beds, more waiting. For some of them, it meant dying somewhere new, again. I felt something rise in me then, not anger, not fear, but a deep, heavy refusal. I had torn this place open to expose its sickness. But I couldn't watch it collapse on the innocent. Not on Lydia. Not on Arthur. Not on the ones who had no fight left. That night, I sat in the common room as the news replayed. My own letter flashed on the screen, blurred, but recognizable by its typewritten style. Beneath it, the caption read. Anonymous tipster Hamda sparks major nursing home investigation. I stood. My cane echoed against the tile. Reporters and officials filled the hallway outside, scribbling notes, snapping photos. I opened the door and stepped out into the noise. Benji Cole spotted me first. Ma'am, can we get your name? He asked, lowering his mic out of respect. I met his eyes and said, steady and clear. My name is Evelyn Morel. And I am M.E. A hush fell. The cameras turned. This place broke people like me, I said, my voice rough but unwavering. It stole from us, lied to us, buried us under paperwork and pity. But not anymore. I'm not letting it break anyone else. Benji's camera caught every word. Lydia's tears caught the light. Arthur's shaky applause started small, then spread across the hall until the whole room was clapping, the sound brittle but alive. Detective Hale stood at the back, arms folded, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his lips. He nodded once, not at the whistleblower, but at the woman who refused to fade. That night, as the headlines spread across every channel, I finally allowed myself a long, trembling breath. The empire that stole from us had fallen. But mine was just beginning to rise. They left me here to disappear quietly. Instead, I made the world hear me. Evelyn sat at the back of the courthouse auction room, her posture straight and her expression unreadable. Around her, the room buzzed with investors, developers, and opportunists, all eager to snatch up the property that had become a citywide scandal, Golden Dusk Care Facility. The auctioneer's voice boomed, numbers flying like gunfire. Starting bid, 300,000. Do I hear 320? No one looked twice at the frail woman in the gray shawl. They didn't see her trembling hands gripping a folder marked the Haven proposal. They didn't know this wasn't the same woman her children had dumped in that place a year ago. When the bids began to slow, Evelyn stood. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. 400,000. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer blinked, surprised, but nodded. 400 from the lady in the back. Do I hear 420? No one countered. Minutes later, the gavel struck. Sold. The cameras caught it, the moment the frail nursing home resident bought the very building where she had once been abandoned. Over the next months, Golden Dusk was reborn. The smell of bleach and rot was replaced with fresh paint and lavender oil. Broken railings were repaired. Gardens were planted where cigarette stubs once littered the soil. The sign out front now read, "The Haven, a home, not a holding cell." Evelyn oversaw every detail. Her pension, what little was left, became seed money. Donations poured in from community members who had seen her story on the news. A few sympathetic business owners offered discounted supplies. Even some of the younger nurses, disillusioned with the old system, volunteered their weekends. Lydia became head nurse, her compassion finally matched by authority. Arthur, though slowing with age, managed public communications and resident relations, cracking dry jokes as he typed press releases on an ancient laptop. Under Evelyn's leadership, the Haven became more than a facility, it became a statement. Every resident had a say in how things ran. They held resident board meetings every Friday, where decisions were made by vote, from meal menus to recreational programs. New amenities appeared, a library filled with donated books, a garden blooming with marigolds and mint, and a small therapy wing where retired doctors volunteered their time. Reporters returned, expecting to find a tragedy. Instead, they found a miracle. Evelyn appeared on the local news, standing proudly before the renovated building. Her voice was calm, steady, every word weighted with experience. Golden Dusk was built to contain people like me. But we built the Haven to remind the world, we're still here, and we still matter. The story went national. Social media dubbed her the matriarch who built an empire from a nursing home. As her interview aired, Evelyn's children watched from their penthouse apartment. Clara's wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. She wasn't supposed to survive that long, she muttered, disbelief lacing her tone. Jared stared at the TV, at his mother smiling beside her new community, surrounded by friends and flowers and respect. For the first time, he looked small. That night, as Evelyn walked through the Haven's softly lit halls, she paused by the front window. Rain tapped gently against the glass. Arthur's voice echoed faintly from the common room, telling a story to a few residents by the fire. Lydia was checking charts, humming quietly. Evelyn smiled. She'd built something lasting, not from vengeance alone, but from dignity reclaimed. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the next chapter wasn't about survival anymore. It was about legacy. Evelyn was reviewing invoices in her office when Lydia poked her head in. There's company, she said carefully. 2 of them. They said their family. Evelyn didn't need to ask who. When she stepped into the lobby, the scent of expensive perfume hit first, too sharp for a place that smelled of lemon polish and chamomile tea. Clara stood there in a tailored beige suit, her smile polished to perfection. Jared, beside her, wore a designer watch that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Mother! Clara exclaimed, voice trembling with false warmth. You look incredible. We've missed you so much. Evelyn folded her hands neatly in front of her. Have you? Jared thrust forward a bouquet of lilies. We brought flowers. Thought they'd brighten up the place. Arthur, passing by with his coffee, muttered just loud enough, pretty sure she's the one who brightened it up already. Evelyn smothered a laugh behind a polite cough. She ushered them inside. Come. Let's sit in the common room. It's quieter there. They followed, heels clicking, eyes darting around at the residents reading newspapers and chatting near the windows. Every inch of the Haven looked spotless, dignified, a living testament to what Evelyn had built. After the pleasantries, Clara leaned forward, voice dropping. Mom, we made mistakes, she began, glancing at Jared. We thought we were helping. But seeing all you've accomplished, we're so proud. Jared nodded quickly.
Yeah,
It's incredible what you did here. I mean, this could be something really big. Maybe even franchised, right? Evelyn smiled faintly. Ah. There it is. They blinked. She leaned back, unhurried. You didn't come to see me. You came to see what you could still get. Clara's mask faltered. That's not fair. Oh, it's perfectly fair, Evelyn interrupted. And I think it's time you both understood what a care really means. Later that afternoon, residents watched with quiet amusement as Clara and Jared rolled suitcases down the hall, wearing crisp visitor badges. Lydia handed them matching uniforms. For your stay, she said sweetly. All trial participants wear them. Trial participants? Jared echoed. Evelyn appeared behind him, voice smooth. The Haven's new Family Reconnection Program. It's meant to help families rebuild trust from the ground up. You'll stay a week. Experience daily routines, meals, schedules. Just like we did. Clara's smile froze. You mean, live here? Evelyn tilted her head. Live with us. You'll adjust. By day 2, the transformation was complete. The siblings who once turned up their noses at cafeteria food now sat in the dining hall, pushing around bowls of oatmeal that tasted like cardboard. When Clara complained, Lydia raised an eyebrow. That's the state-regulated diet your mom used to get. You remember, right? Jared, bleary-eyed from the 9 p.m. lights-out rule, groaned when told he couldn't use his phone after curfew. Arthur walked by, chuckling. Looks like the caretakers became the cared for. Evelyn watched from her office window, hands resting on her cane, expression unreadable. She didn't gloat, not out loud. But when she saw her children struggling to adjust, something inside her finally settled. Not satisfaction. Not cruelty. Just peace. They were living her past, for the first time, understanding what they'd thrown her into. At dinner, Clara approached quietly. Mom, this is humiliating. Evelyn met her eyes. Then maybe you understand what humiliation feels like. You called it care. I call it abandonment. Clara's chin trembled. Jared stayed silent. Evelyn smiled faintly. But don't worry. This isn't punishment. It's education. She turned, her voice calm and resolute. Welcome home. That night, as the siblings lay in narrow twin beds under flickering lights, Evelyn walked the hall, the faint sound of Arthur's laughter echoing behind her. For the first time since they'd left her there to rot, she wasn't the one trapped in someone else's idea of mercy. She was the one writing the rules. Morning sunlight streamed through the east windows of the Haven, turning the air golden. Evelyn walked slowly across the corridor, her cane tapping rhythmically against the polished floors. Behind her trailed Clara and Jared, dressed neatly but visibly uncomfortable in the plain guest uniforms they'd been given. Ready for the grand tour? Evelyn asked lightly, though her eyes were sharp. Clara forced a laugh. Of course, Mother. We'd love to see your progress. Evelyn's lips curved. Our progress, she corrected. This isn't just mine. Every resident here built something worth remembering. She began the tour in the garden, rows of tulips and sunflowers swaying in the breeze. Do you see these hands? Evelyn gestured to Mr. Alvarez, kneeling in the soil with a watering can. He designed this layout himself. Used to be an architect until his family couldn't handle his forgetfulness. Mr. Alvarez looked up, smiling warmly. Your mom gave me a job again, said memory loss isn't incompetence, just misplaced experience. Evelyn continued to the library, where soft music played. Mrs. Dalka, a retired teacher, sat reading poetry aloud to 2 residents. She hadn't spoken for months before she came here, Evelyn said quietly. Now she runs the weekly book circle. You should join, if you can sit still that long. Jared looked away. Every stop told a story. Every face reminded them of the lives that had once been discarded, just like Evelyn's. By the time they reached the therapy wing, Clara's expression had gone pale. She turned to her brother. "You told me she wanted to move in here," she hissed under her breath. "You said it was her idea." Jared snapped, "You're the one who handled the finances. You said it was for her safety." Their voices echoed down the hall. Residents glanced up, calm, unbothered, almost amused. Evelyn didn't intervene. She simply kept walking, letting their guilt unravel naturally. Finally, she stopped before a long, double-door hallway that shimmered faintly with reflected light. A small plaque above read, "The Mirror Room." Evelyn rested her hand on the handle. "This," she said softly, "is where we remember who we were before they tried to erase us." Inside, the walls gleamed with framed photographs, rows and rows of portraits taken when each resident first arrived. Each photo was split in two, one half of who they were before abandonment, smiling, proud, alive, and the other half, their first day at golden dusk, hollow eyes, trembling hands, the look of being forgotten. Clara's breath caught. "This is truth," Evelyn finished for her. They walked deeper into the room. Surrounded by silent witnesses of broken families and rekindled souls. At the far end stood Evelyn's own portrait. The first frame showed her from a year ago, fragile, sitting in a wheelchair, her expression blank. Beside it hung a current photo, head held high, a soft smile, her cane in one hand and the other resting on a folder titled The Haven Cooperative. Below it, engraved in brass, were the words, "Family, the ones who forgot." Next to her stood two smaller frames, one of Clara, one of Jared. Each labeled with the same chilling line. The humiliation hit them like cold air. Jared's jaw tightened. "You can't just, this is public." Evelyn turned slowly to face them. "You wanted me buried in silence," she said, her voice calm but heavy with power. "Instead, I became a voice." Her gaze drifted over the portraits. "You made me believe my life was over. But you see," she gestured toward the shining walls, the rows of reclaimed dignity, "it was just beginning." Clara's eyes shimmered with anger and shame. "Mom, you don't understand." Evelyn's tone sharpened. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You were protecting your comfort, not my well-being. And that's exactly what you see on these walls, the cost of comfort bought with other people's pain." The siblings stood frozen, surrounded by reflections of what they had done, faces they could not forget, voices that no longer needed their pity. Evelyn turned toward the exit. "Lunch is at noon," she said gently. "You're welcome to join us. It's lentil soup today, my favorite from the days when I had nothing." And with that, she left them standing among the mirrors, staring at their own reflections, framed forever beside the woman they had underestimated. Rain streaked down the windows of the Haven that evening, tracing crooked lines across the glass like the past trying to right itself again. The residents were gathered in the common room for movie night, laughter and the smell of popcorn filling the air. In the quiet of her office, Evelyn sat behind her oak desk, reading over financial reports. Her glasses glinted beneath the lamplight. Across from her sat Clara and Jared, both looking smaller than she'd ever remembered them. Clara's mascara had already begun to smudge. "Mom, please," she said, voice trembling. "We were wrong. I see that now. We should never have left you here. I don't know what we were thinking." Evelyn didn't look up. "You were thinking about convenience," she said softly. Clara's breath hitched. "No, we thought it was safer for you." Evelyn finally met her eyes. "You thought I was safer without you." The silence stretched, thick and cutting. Jared leaned forward, trying a different tactic. "Look, Mom. What's done is done. But you've built something incredible here, and it's only fair you let us help manage it. You know, like we used to with your accounts." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Help me manage?" He nodded quickly, sensing her hesitation. "Exactly. You've got so many moving parts now, donors, press, payroll. You shouldn't have to handle it all alone." She smiled, the kind of smile that meant the conversation was about to end, and not in their favor. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly. "But I've already handled it." She opened a drawer, pulled out a neat folder, and laid it between them. Inside were notarized forms, statements, and transfer confirmations. Her voice was calm, almost clinical. 2 months after you placed me here, I regained control of my assets. Quietly. The bank helped once I showed them the documentation of mismanagement. Jared stiffened. Mismanagement? Evelyn turned a page. Clara, you used my savings to pay off your mortgage. Jared, you invested my retirement fund in a startup that no longer exists. Technically, you could both be charged. The color drained from their faces. But Evelyn leaned back and folded her hands. Don't worry. I'm not pressing charges. I'm offering an opportunity. Clara frowned. Opportunity? Yes, Evelyn said with a small smile. To understand what care truly means. A week later, the Havens newsletter featured a new initiative. Family Healing Program, a groundbreaking reconciliation model. Relatives of residents will serve in hands-on roles to rebuild empathy and connection. The photo showed Evelyn smiling proudly beside her children, each wearing matching volunteer uniforms. The public adored the story. A mother's forgiveness, the headlines called it. But inside the facility, the truth was quieter and far sharper. Clara found herself scrubbing the kitchen floor alongside residents she'd once pitied. Lydia supervised, offering no special treatment. Mom said this builds character, Lydia said gently. I think she's right. Meanwhile, Jared was assigned to maintenance. Arthur handed him a mop on day 1. Careful, he quipped. It's heavier than your conscience. For 6 long months, they lived by the same schedule Evelyn once endured: early mornings, communal chores, shared spaces. No luxury, no shortcuts. At first, they resisted. Then, slowly, humility set in. Clara began helping residents read their mail. Jared started fixing squeaky wheelchairs without being asked. But every night, when they looked toward the office window and saw their mother working late under the soft light, they realized she didn't do this for pity or power. She did it to restore dignity, theirs included. When the 6 months ended, they stood before her again. Clara's eyes were red, her voice small. Mom. I don't expect forgiveness. But I understand now what we did. And if there's ever a way to make it right. Evelyn stopped her with a gentle hand. You already did. You learned. Clara blinked, tears threatening again. Then, we're family again? Evelyn's voice softened. You'll always be my children. But some bridges, dear, are meant to be admired from a distance. Jared swallowed hard. What does that mean? Evelyn smiled faintly. It means love doesn't always come with inheritance. Their confusion flickered into quiet dread. Evelyn rose, walking past them toward the hallway. The paperwork for my estate is already finalized. You'll both see soon enough what legacy truly looks like. As she disappeared around the corner, Arthur appeared in the doorway, watching them with a sympathetic half-smile. She taught you the hard way, he said softly. But that's the only way worth learning. Outside, thunder rolled, not violent, but cleansing. Inside the haven, Evelyn sat by her window, gazing at the garden she'd built from ruins. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, calm, unbroken, sovereign. Her revenge had never been loud. It had been earned. The garden at the haven shimmered in late afternoon light, soft gold stretching over blooming lavender and marigolds. Residents gathered beneath white canopies, their wheelchairs and walking canes arranged in neat circles. Reporters lined the edge of the courtyard, cameras glinting, microphones poised. At the center sat Evelyn Carr, elegant in a pale blue shawl, her silver hair pinned back neatly. The years had softened her face, but sharpened her presence. Lydia stood nearby, hands clasped proudly. Arthur leaned against a railing, his smile subtle but knowing. Clara and Jared sat in the front row, tense and uncertain, still holding on to the hope that this was their moment of redemption. Evelyn adjusted her glasses and looked around at the crowd, her voice quiet but steady. Thank you all for being here, she began. I never imagined my life would end in a garden I helped plant, surrounded by people who taught me what survival truly means. A hush fell over the audience. She continued, her tone calm, deliberate. When I was brought to golden dusk, I thought it was the end. I thought my story was already written, and it wasn't a kind one. But then I learned something. Her eyes glistened as she looked out at the faces before her, the people who'd once been invisible. You cannot kill purpose by abandoning it. You only give it time to evolve. She reached into a folder on her lap and lifted a single document, her last will and testament. Lydia handed her a microphone. Evelyn's voice carried clearly now, firm as a verdict. I, Evelyn Carr, hereby leave every cent of my estate, including my home, savings, pension, and all business holdings, to the Haven Foundation. A non-profit dedicated to the care, education, and dignity of residents without families. A ripple moved through the crowd, soft gasps, murmurs, the sound of a legacy shifting hands. Evelyn looked toward her children. To my children, Clara and Jared, I leave something less material, but perhaps more valuable. The chance to live with what they've learned. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Jared's face went pale. Evelyn's voice didn't waver. You taught me what neglect costs, she said, her gaze unwavering. So I'm spending the rest of my life repaying it, to people who still remember love. She folded the papers, handed them to her lawyer, and smiled faintly. It's time the right people inherited something that matters. Applause began softly, one resident, then another, until the sound grew warm and thunderous, echoing through the garden. Cameras flashed. Evelyn simply sat there, content, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Arthur leaned in and murmured with a half-smile, You really did it, you know. You won. Evelyn chuckled quietly. I didn't win, Arthur. I just stopped losing. A fresh spring morning dawns over the Haven. The garden is even more beautiful now, benches polished, flowers brighter, laughter stronger. Children from local schools visit weekly to read with the seniors. A new wing bears the name the Carr Center for renewal. On the outer wall of the courtyard stands a mural, Evelyn's portrait rendered in soft colors, her kind eyes gazing toward the horizon. Beneath it reads. She turned abandonment into a legacy. Arthur, older but still sharp, narrates during a televised segment commemorating her life. They left her to fade, he says, voice gravelly but full of pride. She built an empire instead. The camera pans across smiling residents, the blooming gardens, and the plaque bearing Evelyn's name. And in the final frame, her favorite chair sits empty beneath the marigold tree, a book open on its armrest, a shawl draped over the back, as the wind gently turns the pages, carrying her story forward.